I'd like to welcome everyone to another episode of Conversations with Elan about the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music, the movements, and the meaning that's embedded in them. So, without further ado, Elan is going to take us on another one of his very interesting excursions into this question.
Okay, well, I thought that today we should conclude what we were talking about the last time we met about number 21, the movement Remorse of Conscience, because there were some things that were left out that we didn't get to at the end, and one of those things is the question of the bridge between what de Hartmann did with Gurdjieff and what de Hartmann did after he left Gurdjieff with his own compositions. And and this particular piece is a very good example, although it's, as you will see, as you will find out, it's a little backwards, but it still will do the job. So I want to begin, but before I talk about that particular thing, I want to go into um, I want to touch on a couple of subjects that we've we've not yet touched upon. Okay, and in order to do that, I want to play something for you and ask you some questions to begin with. Okay, so
Okay.
so here is a melody. Okay, and I want you to listen to the melody and just tell me anything that you notice about it. It's the top line of the melody for number 21. And I'm going to play that, and I'm also going to then play a little bit of a melody line from a piece that he wrote that is related to it, but it's a classical piece of music. Oh, sorry. And that's enough. Okay, I played it much quicker than it appears in the movement, but I just want you to hear how that melody goes, and then we could talk about it. And here's another melody that he wrote in another piece, and in that in it's written in octaves, and I'm going to play you only the lower note of that melody, and I want to see if you can notice a similarity or not. Okay, so here goes. Okay, so can you tell me if you noticed anything in those two melodies?
Well, they are related. Both of them start out in the lower register, reach for the medium to higher register, and then return before they go up again. The first one, I think that the second one gives an emotional impression that's largely like the first one in the sense that it has a bit of an Eastern Orthodox hymnal flavor built into it. But it's got a peculiar feature in that the unusual formality of that structure is changed and inflected by the higher notes and the rests between them so that it actually sounds more personal when it reaches the higher register. So it sounds to me, from a conceptual point of view, as though it's establishing a formal structure, but then it's inviting a more intimate relationship with it as it searches for the higher. That's my impression.
Okay, so that is really you've said in slightly different words, but you've said exactly what I was hoping would be obviously apparent, and that is that the melody begins low and it rises. And within the different patterns, it rises and falls, but generally speaking, there's an upward movement. And this is one of the things that I wanted to bring to the attention about music is that we've talked about rhythm, but we've really said nothing at all about melody. And the first thing to know about melody is that notes either go up, they go down, or they stay the same. And then after we get into that, we can also then discuss the subject of scales, but that's not part of a modality, different scales, major and minor scales, etc. But that's not really the subject that I want to go into today. But the first thing is that this that the melody moves upwards in both of these pieces. Now, I want to skip ahead just for a moment. No, I don't want to skip ahead for a moment. I want to just play a little bit of those melodies again, and I want to add something, and that's dynamic. And I want you to hear what's going on with the dynamic, okay? And this is what's written in the music. So, in the first, number 21. Okay, and I'll stop there. And what do you notice about the dynamic here? In other words, the loud, the soft.
Well, it becomes more emphatic and not quite staccato, but more definite and louder towards the end of the piece. It reaches a crescendo and then it slides back down the register a bit from there.
Right.
So there's an intensity that develops and kind of completes itself at the top of the register, after which it relaxes a bit.
All right. So that's true, and that's what's written into the music. One of the things that I noticed when I was playing it, though, was that when I played it the same touch in my fingers, it sounded louder as I went up anyway.
And
So,
that's how pitch works.
so I did. That's the same pressure in my
Yeah.
fingers, and yet it's sounding louder. Now, I'm trying underneath all of this discussion, I'm trying to bring out, to look at what Hartmann is doing when he composes this music that relates it to the program of this movement. And this is a great movement for this purpose because the movement actually has a name, Remorse of Conscience. And when we talked last time about the rhythm and the bass and how he uses a triplet instead of a duplet to create the feeling of welling up of emotion, as opposed to duplet, 2, 3. So he uses triplet in the bass to create that feeling of the emotion, the remorse coming up, welling up. Now, he's doing the same thing, but with the melody here. So the melody starts soft, and it gets louder, okay? So the emotion, and you mentioned something about it when you responded to the question of not only the direction, but also the dynamic, that it intensifies. So he's using the melody to intensify this feeling, and he's also using the dynamic of going from soft and then a gradual crescendo, which is also written into this all the way up to forte. So those are two things that I wanted to bring up too. And yes, and I wanted to touch also about this subject of dynamics, that melody has direction and dynamics have direction, and you can hear it very clearly in this. The direction in the melody also has to do with whether it's going up, down, or staying the same. We have yet to discuss what each of those could really be used for symbolically in the music, how a composer could use them, but that's for another time. Now, okay, I want to just bring up one other thing that is related to what we were talking about way back when I was talking about Janine Dallas's way of looking at rhythm. Remember, I was talking about breath and rhythm and how rhythm actually works related to gravity. And we went through that whole thing. And at one point, the question came up: is this model that she presented? It's not really my model that she presented. Is this an objective thing? Does this always happen? And I said, yes, underlying all music, all rhythm, these things apply. However, the composer is not constrained to only use the direction, for example. Let me see if I can do it. Well, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So 1 is strong, 2 is weak. 1, 2, 3. 3 is strong, going up. 4, 1. But the composer has definite ways to change that. For example, the composer can put an accent on a note that is not does not fit into that pattern, and that accent can sometimes give meaning that he wants to insert. And there's a great example of it in this piece, and I'm just going to show you what that is. So when he gets to the top of the line in Remorse of Conscience, in number 21, he goes, and he puts an accent on that G sharp, okay? Mm-hmm. So if he had written it without the accent, it would have sounded like this. Right? It would have sounded like that. But instead of going bum, bum, ba, bum, he goes bum, bum, ba, bum, bum. And then he does it in the next bar too. Da, 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 da. He puts accents on the offbeat. Now, my understanding is the reason he puts those accents in is because this is the height of the piece. This is the height of the line. And he wants to indicate the pangs that actually come when you're really deep in this remorseful state. So he's using that as a means to show that process. Okay? Anyway, and this is just the tip of a large iceberg. There's also, for example, he can also leave out, like on a first beat, which would be accented, he could take that out. He could not play a note on that. That's called syncopation, where you're expecting an accent and you don't get it. And to my mind, these actions that a composer will use in his piece to insert meaning are parallel to what Gurdjieff talks about in the chapter on art, where he talks about lawful inexactitudes. Because it is an inexactitude in the way the rhythm works, and they are inserted in these patterns
Hmm.
provide meaning. So what else could they possibly be? They're not Gurdjieff's inexactitudes, but they are still inexactitudes. Okay? So um, I'm I'm going to stop here for a moment in case you have something that you want to bring up before we
Well,
go.
I've been doing my own stuff that's got little in the immediate sense with the music, and I was working on the ray of creation and some things today, and the shocks. And it occurs to me that you could translate the word lawful inexactitudes and say that you're applying shocks in various places. There are changes in the rate of vibration that completely follow the form and the structure that's outlined in the Enneagram, and yet uh, they seem to be irregular in a way, and that's a vivifying factor. They're not irregular at all. They're lawful, but they're not expected, as you said, and the unexpected is what calls our attention back to being. The expected doesn't tend to do that.
Right? That's a very interesting idea. So it's like, uh, you know, it's like when you're exploring. So in this exploration that now I've gotten to be much more interested in than I used to be. When I open a piece of the Hartmann music or other music, I'm looking I'm looking for things, and it is these unexpectednesses that
Yeah.
catch my attention because you ask the question, why did the composer do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why did the composer do this? And sometimes you have a composer like de Hartmann, we have various versions, and he's got two different ways of doing it. Sometimes they're completely opposite. And you ask yourself, why did he do that? Was he just a moron? Or or did he have different perceptions that had meaning in two different possible meanings could be applied to the same thing, which is very interesting because we always try to find the answer.
Mm.
We're sort of geared for the answer, and yet it's not a question of the answer. It's a question of exploring. Now, I want to bring on. I had I had thought that this was going to be a 10-minute thing, but
Uh-oh.
we're already getting way behind it. I'm
Well, I'm about to make the problem worse, but I'll try not to.
so I want to just bring in one other thing about this music before I possibly play something for you, which is always, gives you a taste of what I'm trying to talk about. But before we do that, I want to add the harmony to these lines, okay? And the harmony, just to remind you, we have single notes, then we have two notes together, we have intervals, and we've talked about intervals, and when you play the intervals at the same time, the notes at the same time, that creates a certain kind of harmony. Okay, that's what we use when we're talking about music. And these are three-note chords that I'm going to play for you. And I want you to listen to both the classical piece that he wrote and also to the Remorse of Conscience, which we all know. Okay? So we begin with the number 21. Just the melody and the harmony, but no bass. Okay? And I'm going to now play you just the intervals in pattern that I played for you before, if I can find it. Oh, right. Here we go. Okay? And I want you to notice that the harmony for each of these chords is the same in both pieces, except for the very beginning of number 21, where he's using smaller intervals. And then he's using, and when he really gets going, all he's using is the interval of a fifth and a fourth. All the intervals in those chords, and you don't have to be a musician, what I'm called a practiced musician, or understand music theory, to be able to hear that these intervals are the same using different notes, but the relation between the notes is the same. And
Yeah.
he's using that fifth always in between. And keep in mind that when we talked about intervals, we talked about the fifth as being the harnaut, the point of maximum, what's it called, disharmony,
Mm-hmm.
point of disharmony, where a process gets either maximum pain, loss of direction, or on fire. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so those are the three things. And this one is using just that loss of direction interval. This, okay. Just to remind you, we have the three different aspects of the harnaut. On the piano, we have this, the fire, and the pain. Okay, that's how I would describe them. And both of these pieces use this harmony throughout. And you can hear, it's very interesting. It's a very uncompromising interval.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing pretty about it, you know?
Well, I got to disagree with you there because I think it's beautiful, but it's a subjective interpretation in a sense. I think that the emotional state that it evokes has a magnificence to it that's not available if you use a different interval. That interval is perfectly suited to the feeling expression that it's trying to reach for.
Exactly. And in my experience of remorse, which I'm going to also I was planning to read something to you from a very short paragraph from Beelzebub and also from the program notes for the CDs that we put out. You know, he talks about this how remorse, there is this uncompromising thing that you are faced with yourself. And one of the things that came to me when I was in touch with two movements teachers about this movement, just to make sure I remembered the gestures. And one thing that's very interesting about it is that the head is forward for the entire movement.
Hmm.
And I asked myself, how many movements are there
Yeah.
that only has the head forward? The head never goes up, it never goes to the sides, never goes down. It's just forward. So, and looking at that and putting that with remorse, I am faced with myself in that moment. I see myself, and there's no way to escape that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we are at that point where I could do some playing. How much time do we have?
Well, I don't know if we cleave to form, we've got another 5 minutes. We go a little over. It doesn't matter.
Okay, okay. This is not going to take long, but I want you just read to you something that Gurdjieff says, because it's very relevant to this piece that I'm going to play for you. Okay, it's very short. It's in the Shatashiyamash chapter as when he's talking about remorse of conscience. Here it is necessary to say that these favorites of yours, particularly the contemporary ones, become ideally expert in not allowing this inner impulse of theirs, called remorse of conscience, to linger long in their common presences. No sooner do they begin to sense the beginning, or even only, so to say, the prick of the arising of the functioning of them, of such a being impulse, then they immediately, as is said, squash it, whereupon this impulse, not yet quite formed in them, at once calms down. So, that's what he says about remorse of conscience. Now, this piece that I'm going to play for you was written in 1947, before the movement music was composed in 1950. I believe that Hartmann stole from himself from this piece. And let me read to you what it says. This is called the Musique pour la fête de la patronne d'après Degas. It's based on a painting by Degas, which, let's see, it depicts a scene from a brothel in which the filles de joie throw a party for their patroness. Okay, so the madame. The title of each movement, so there are three movements. There's a polka, which is ironic, a valse langoureuse, which is suggestive, and then this quadrille, which is really a military form of 5 military dances. And in that last part, it quotes the Tombeau de Couperin by Ravel, Chopin's Funeral March, and in Hartmann's own writing, he says, at the end, and this is where I'm going to play for you, at the end, so there's this monstrously ironic, mad movement going on in the music. And at a certain point, a fantastic monster appears inside a cafe where there is much dancing and drinking. It is the real patron of the feast, death. Imperceptibly, the women put on masks, and you now see old, unhappy creatures whose life has brought to such an existence and death. So, translation of what he is saying seems to be an indication of a similarity between the remorse, and you will see, I'm only going to play the very end of the piece, so you have to imagine that this madness has been going on for a while, and you'll hear how that madness all of a sudden stops and opens to this sound just like what I was playing for you from Remorse of Conscience, and how immediately, very quickly, it is just squashed, and it goes back to the mad ending. Okay? So I'm just going to play this to you, and this is an introduction to the whole subject of Thomas de Hartmann's interest in putting Gurdjieff's ideas into his music. So, let me see if I can find it. This particular dance is called the galop, a gallop, okay? And you'll hear the gallop of the horse. I'm going to have to, let me continue.
It's a striking piece of music.
Okay, so
You'll have to, I've got to digest that one.
it's in the that piece of music was recorded in 1926 for the box set that came out in 2016, and you can hear it on YouTube. You can hear the whole piece. It's it's Opus Thomas de Hartmann Opus 77, Musique pour la fête de la patronne, um, and this is the third movement. But it's only a 9-minute piece altogether. It's very short.
I just got to write it down or I'll forget how that goes. I'll listen to it today. It's very reminiscent of progressive rock, actually. It is. That things like that happen. Of course, not all progressive rock is created equal. That would be at the top end of the skill level.
Well, I'm gonna have to let Robert know.
Well, if he had played it with his band, it would have been pretty interesting. Well, the thing that occurs to me about De Hartmann, the Gurdjieff De Hartmann music, and it could equally be said of some of Robert's music, is that there's a search in it. And I've listened to ecclesiastic music my whole life. I grew up in the Church of England. I'm an Anglican. I'm an Episcopalian. We call them in the U.S. But so I grew up with that kind of music, and I think that hymnals are supposedly supposed to include a search in them. They often don't seem to. They're wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but they don't have the search in them, and I'm always drawn to the search in the Gurdjieff music. Other musics do have it sometimes, and they're always outstanding when they do. Uh, the question arises in me, and it's a much larger question that we're actually exploring in this series: is what is it that creates a search in a piece of music? Because if it's not there, I don't know personally that you could even do movements to it. It wouldn't be movements anymore. And that's what distinguishes movements from dance. There's a search. The piece we opened up with has a search in it. And the minute that it's not so apparent in the melody, but the minute that the harmony comes in, you hear it. So it's evocative to me, and I've always, since the first time I heard the Gurdjieff music, I've heard the search in it. That's what attracts me. If a piece doesn't seem to embody that effectively when it's played, it always seems to be missing the salt, you know.
Right. Well, do I have time to tell one very short story?
Absolutely. We'll wrap up with your story.
Well, because it's apropos of what you're saying. Um, on December 8th, 2012, I gave a little in-house concert in the Netherlands of the De Hartmann music that we were getting ready to record, and there were 40 people who came, and 20 people were from the professional musicians, and 20 people were from the Gurdjieff Foundation in the Netherlands. And I threw in 2 or 3 pieces of the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music in that concert. And after it was over, the engineer, the recording engineer, came over to me and he said that he had always prided himself on listening to a piece of music for the first time and getting what made it work. And he said this was the first time that he had ever heard music that he could not figure out what made it work. Because it's so simple on the surface, it's so simple. It doesn't have any of the flash that this, and yet the effect that it creates is so powerful. And at that moment, he also offered someday, if I ever wanted to work with him on doing some recordings of that music, he would be happy to, which is now about to take place in September. We
Mm.
find after many years that we're going to do it. So that, yes, I think that it has to do with the person who composes the music. If they have the search in them, if they have that energy in them, they transmit it to the music. And that's what you're hearing with the Gurdjieff to Hartmann music, which is different from the Hartmann music. You know? The Gurdjieff to Hartmann music has, I don't know how it appears there, but it has Gurdjieff in it. Gurdjieff transmitted something through to Hartmann into that music, which is still palpable.
Hmm. Well, it's somewhere in each piece of music there is an interval that hasn't been filled in which there's a search taking place for the arrival of real feeling. And he is wise enough to leave the opening without trying to fill it. That's a tricky thing to do. So, anyway, thanks again for another outstanding talk about the music. I'm enjoying them more and feeling that they feed me more and more with every passing episode. So, and I'm sure that your audience thanks you as well. And we will be doing this again, inshallah. We will do it again next week.
All right.
But thanks again, Elan.